Mr. Swensen or Swensen?
It depends where you are.
Okay.
This name is not really the old Norwegian family name. My grandfather immigrated to America at around 1902, and he came with a name that's impossible to pronounce, and the customs immigration official in New York said, "Oh, you are from Norway, you are Swensen." You don't find people in Norway with this name spelled like that. It's always S-V-E-N, sometimes S-V-E-N-D. So it's really an American version of a Norwegian name. My grandparents on both sides of the family are immigrants from very different places. My mother's family is from Japan, and my father's from Norway.
I'd like to ask you, how does maths sound?
Well, this is just a crazy idea that I have felt in my intuition for decades, especially with certain composers, and of course Bach more than any. The relationship between the mystery of sound and how vibrations work, where sound of different frequencies harmonize with each other or do not. Combination of notes either played at the same time or one after the other, sometimes be extremely powerful emotionally, that certain combinations of notes have a real elegance. Of course, when you speak to mathematicians, they will say similar things about numbers, but with math, it's, at least at the moment, it's only possible with math to actually prove why an equation might be particularly elegant. In music, it's very difficult to prove why a series of notes might be particularly elegant. So I have a suspicion that someday someone will discover why. Perhaps there are numbers that one can associate with sounds. And if that's the case, then every beautiful melody could have a corresponding mathematical equation. Both the melody and the equation might be, particularly elegant.
And when the discovery is finished, we'll probably find out the mystery of music, behind the music.
Yes, but I don't think there's any less mystery because we will know it. I think, in a way, mathematics proves that because we have, of course, many proofs in mathematics, but still tremendous mystery. The mysteries in mathematics that exist are inspiring. So I'm quite sure there will not ever be time where there will be no more mysteries. I think that would be, in a way, it would be a shame because the mystery is what inspires us to continue to search.
And how does Leopoldinum Orchestra sound?
Well, for me, 3 years ago when I first worked with them, and I remember very clearly our first rehearsal, we worked very hard, and I thought, this is very, very interesting orchestra, very passionate people, and all playing very well, kind of wild and a little chaotic, but I liked them very, very much. Then after they asked if I would come and be their music director, months and years pass, and I had my first rehearsal, and it was in some ways the same orchestra with really passionate people and tremendous enthusiasm and desire, ambition, and all for me, the most important things for an orchestra to have. But they were playing in a way more harmoniously. For me, there's a beautiful intersection between, you could say, the individual and the community. If you have many orchestras nowadays are extremely community oriented, individual self-expression is frowned upon. It's people think that it's inappropriate to play in an orchestra, especially if you play in the string section, in any way which gives the feeling that you are getting attention for yourself. I understand this, but I think, if everyone playing, even in the viola section where you're playing the same notes as 10 other people, if everyone is giving from themselves, then there's no one will stick out, no one will take the attention for himself. And I think it's an absolutely necessary thing for every person in an orchestra to have the opportunity to express themselves, express how they feel about the music, and play a passage the way they think it ought to be played. And yes, if you're playing it with 10 other people, it mixes together, It's not like one has to imitate everyone trying to play in exactly the same way. To me, this makes a very narrow sound. It completely changes the sound when people do that. And of course, it reduces the joy of playing in an orchestra by 99%. So we have to find a way to combine the individual joy of making music with the community of the orchestra. So it's a matter of degree, yes, well, if somebody is really playing very differently from everyone else in the section, yes, we have to try and calm them down a little bit, but kind of balance between the needs of the group and the needs of the individual, which is an interesting one to find. I'm so excited about these years to come, because I really think this could be one of the great small orchestras in the world.
So this is your plan, this is your vision, to make Leopoldinum one of the most well-known orchestras, chamber orchestras in Europe.
Of course, but I still, maybe I am naive, but I believe that if an orchestra is playing at an incredible level with fantastic energy and inspiration and joy, then people notice. They say, wow, that's different, yeah? And the word spreads, people talk. Yeah. So, yes, sometimes the best things get famous, and nothing would make me happier than for this orchestra to be recognized as one of the great orchestras in the world. And yes, of course, it is my goal to do everything I can to help to make that happen. I think one of the things that's different about Leopoldinum compared to many of the other chamber orchestras is that we play so much new music, and we play so many pieces, even if they are written by composers people know. We're playing less well-known pieces by those composers. We are doing new music, and we are doing old music in a new way. So this is, for me, a big priority, because I think, especially with a young generation who are very, very curious, and they grow up with internet, and they grow up with this idea that if they get a thought of something, they just go to the internet, and in 5 seconds they can hear what they're thinking about or wondering. Oh, I heard about so and so. Or this energy, this curiosity is something that I'm very interested to connect with, which is very different from, I think, most other chamber orchestras. Most other chamber orchestras are still playing mostly for the older generations, who are mostly interested to hear the same pieces played in the same way, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's much more interesting, at least for me, to feel like we are at least really trying to connect with younger people.
You're a violinist from the cradle?
I was actually a pianist before I was a violinist. My mother, who is Japanese, in some ways typical Asian mother, she started teaching me to play the piano before I could walk, before I could speak. And I remember, it's my earliest memories from age 1.5 of her holding me on her lap and showing me where to put my fingers. And by the time I was 4 or 5, I was playing Mozart sonatas, and I loved it. I was just having so much fun, but I couldn't reach the pedals. I had no idea what was possible, really. It was like playing a harpsichord in that way. When I was 5, my parents heard about a violin teacher who was specializing in working with very small children. And they thought that it would be good for me to meet this woman, and if I felt like learning another instrument, it would keep me out of trouble. So they brought me to her, and I played both violin and piano then for the next 5 years, studying privately with my violin teacher, but at the Juilliard pre-college as a pianist, because I was just beginning violin. And so after 2 years at Juilliard, when I was 7 and 8, playing piano there, I auditioned on violin for a woman who will become my teacher then for the next 15 years. So Dorothy DeLay is a very famous violin teacher at the time, one of the legendary figures in music who died about 10 years ago. She was invited to hear me. I auditioned for her, and I was 9 years old, and I'll never forget that she listened with a big smile on her face, and when I was finished playing, she said, "Sweetie, I would like very much to be your teacher, but all of my students practice at least 3 hours a day." I was 9 years old. I could never imagine such a thing, I looked at my mother, and my mother then said, "He can do that." So I was thinking, oh God. That's when I stopped practicing the piano, because I had a feeling that it wasn't a good idea if I was practicing all day long. I needed to go be outdoors playing sports and being a normal person, and I think it was a good decision.
I have one more question about play direct and conducting.
It's all kind of a hierarchy, and a kind of a little bit unnatural. So often, you feel more in common with the orchestra as a soloist than the conductor feels with the orchestra. So it's really weird to then have the conductor there, especially if it's for like Mozart or even Beethoven, where it's no problem for an orchestra to play with a soloist. They don't need a conductor for that.
Playing direct is very different from just conducting.
I don't think it's so different, no. Many people think conducting is a very complicated thing. And yes, it's very mysterious. It's hard to know exactly why something is good if it's very, very good. You can tell that it is good. It's just hard to know why. So I'm very interested in teaching conducting to people who are not necessarily interested to become conductors. I am actually also interested in teaching conducting to people who love music but are not musicians, because I think there's something in the conducting connected with something more than just music. When you speak to people who do Tai Chi or Qigong, yoga, and other, even things like Alexander Technique, Feldenkrais, even, for example, interesting choreographers in modern dance. And there's something, because we are engaging our bodies to integrate with the sound. Conductors have something more than what is possible to experience doing Tai Chi, for example, where there is no sound. We have Mozart, right? So in a way, that's an additional kind of inspiration, but it's still about finding some kind of harmony between the physical, the intellectual, and the emotional, and the spiritual. So I have students who come to study conducting with me who don't read music, for example, but they know the Mozart Jupiter Symphony. They know how it goes. So when we work together, I am assuming they can hum the piece, they can sing it to me, they can tell me when the oboe plays, they can tell me when it's forte, when it's piano, and so I just say, okay, you conduct, and I pretend I am the concertmaster, yeah? And then that's the beginning, and then we start to try and bring the gestures closer to the music, to the emotion in the music, character of the sound, everything you can imagine and hear in a piece. This is one of the most fascinating things for me now.
And the last question is, what do you search for in music as a composer?
I don't think I'm searching for something in music. I think I'm searching for something in my mind. And I think the mind is mystery. Because of that, it has a feeling of being an infinite place. And to be searching in what feels like an infinite, mysterious place is sometimes very upsetting. It's very difficult. I think it's one reason why if I get inspired to write, I have to have lots of free time at that moment, at least a couple of months where I can just kind of fall into this infinite, mysterious place in search of something. Usually I find some interesting things there, but it's really exhausting for me. So there aren't that many pieces yet, but I usually have one period during a year where I'll allow that to happen, maybe every other year. It reminds me a little bit about how some actors, if they're making a film over many months, they stay in the character no matter what they're doing, and so then they are impossible to live with, depending on what their character is. But their family don't recognize them. I feel a little bit like that. I understand now why Sibelius retired from composing 30 years before he died. Sometimes it's more than uncomfortable. Sometimes it's really painful, because it's never quite right. I mentioned Sibelius. He said that for him composing was as if God had thrown to earth a beautiful divine stained glass window. And it was an absolutely perfect work of art, but it smashed on the earth, and that it was his job as a composer to imagine what it must have looked like in paradise and to put it back together, but to have no idea of what it was. And so this is a formula for failure. No matter how beautiful it might be when you put it together, it's not nearly as beautiful as it was before it was smashed. That's the feeling.
Thank you very much for these beautiful words. And, please enjoy being in Wrocław.
Thank you so much for having me.